Yeah, I'd like to say hello to those who are attending. And as Mike said, we're going live a little bit early just to make sure you know you're in the right place. And we're excited to have you here. I'm Kylie Anderson. I'm the newest managing editor of Hoard's Dairyman. And I'm excited to be a part of this. I'm actually a Fort Atkinson native, born and raised. So glad to be here and excited to be a part of the first webinar I've been a part of. I'll also put a plug in for our podcasts that we're re-engaging as well. So some of you that have been great webinar attendees in the past, we'd love to have you also download content on our podcasts. So we'd welcome that as well.
Very good, very good. Well, we still have a couple of minutes before we rock and roll here. So just giving you an update, we're busy planting corn here in Illinois. We're about 25% planted, and we're up about 5%. Corn's about 5% up, and so we're in a busy planting season, and this is the magic week for us. I think we'll be close to 80% by the time we get to next weekend as far as that goes, because we're going to get some really warm weather, and it's going to dry out some of our really wet spots. There's some really, believe it or not, there's areas in Illinois that is basically considered dry, or in a few cases drought. In some cases, of course, we're still having trouble getting in the fields because of the intermittent rain, especially in the southern part of Illinois. So certainly it's an optimal time to get the seeds in the ground. And we got corn up, it's standing outside of my house here, not too far away, about 3 or 4 inches tall. So obviously the early corn got in early, and beans, and some of you are probably following Kayleen, the national press. Our guys are planting soybeans first because they appear to be safer, or that's the results, and better yield. And it has to do with, believe it or not, day length. In other words, when they're flowering, you want maximum day length of light to get more pods. And well, I'm not an agronomist, but anyway, enough said is from that aspect there. So anyway, we are busily planting. The good news is that our markets are staying modestly strong, even though we are having a bit of a challenge. Most of you online know that we're having some tariff challenges. That's a big deal for dairy farmers. You'll see here a bit later in my webinar, and it's a big deal for our grain farmers as well, because obviously China is one of our major buyers of soybeans and corn. And of course, Mexico is a huge buyer of corn, and of course, we're having a tariff challenge with them as well. But we'll see where this all ends up at this point. Agriculture is kind of in the crosshairs of this whole tariff discussion. But some of you have heard the news this morning. Supposedly, we've had a breakthrough with China, so we'll see how that goes, Kayleen. So anyway, that's kind of the news here at Illinois. The bad news is we lost all 3 of our games to the California's baseball team, so we may be out of the Big Ten tournament, but we'll see. So we continue to have a very active spring sports season right here now. And of course, the big news right now is here in Champaign, we have the regional golf tournament going on. So we have 13 teams from across the United States in a tournament, and of course the 5 winning teams out of this tournament of 13 or 14 teams goes to the national contest. So sports continues to be a big deal as far as that goes. Kaylee, do you want to make any other announcements? I'll turn it back to you, or we can close.
I can kick it off, I think, and I have to say that sadly, I'm a Wisconsin alum, and we do not have a baseball team anymore, and haven't since I think 1993 or 94. So, but we do have a women's softball team, so we can cheer for them and keep rooting for the Badgers. So, all right, well, we'll officially kick off, and want to welcome all of the listeners out there to our May Hoard's Dairyman monthly webinar. My name's Kylie Anderson. I'm, as I said, the editor of Hoard's Dairyman magazine, and I will serve as your host for today's webinar, which will focus on feeding strategies for increasing milk components. If you're listening to this webinar live, you can access the PDF of the slides. Those can be printed. That handout can be found in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. In addition, if you have questions for our speaker, you can type them into the questions section of the control panel, and we will address them as we wrap up the presentation. Today, we welcome back a familiar voice to our webinar series. Our presenter is Dr. Mike Hutjens, Professor Emeritus at the University of Illinois. Dr. Hutjens grew up in a dairy farm in Wisconsin, attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison to further his education. Since 1979, he has been an extension dairy specialist at the Animal Sciences Department at the University of Illinois. Mike is extremely active in the dairy industry, and particularly in the area of feeding and nutrition, and has given presentations and taught dairy farmers around the world. Our editorial team at Hoard's Dairyman has had the honor of working with him for several years on articles, books, and these webinars. Mike, welcome to the webinar, and I look forward to hearing more about your presentation titled Feeding for 7 Pounds of Milk Fat and Protein.
Well, Kaylee, thank you very much. And I think I have to X off to get rid of my image on your screen there. So we'll do that. Hopefully I don't lose you. And we're off and running. And this is kind of an exciting topic. A lot of interest now, and you'll see why here as we hopefully go through the webinar. And we have some take-home messages for you as well. So it's always an honor to be on the Hoard's webinar series. And we're going to talk about an area that is near and dear to most of our dairy farmers here in the United States and probably around the world as well. So we'll be off and running here once we get going. So maybe the first question that we can address, and that, why are we doing this webinar? And according to my data, about 80% of us in the United States are paid on the basis of pounds of milk fat and pounds of protein. We also are paid for milk lactose, but it's a much smaller value, as you'll see here in just a few minutes here. And then a somatic cell count premium is involved as well. Another source said close to 90% of the milk is being priced that way. So we're not paid on how many 100 pounds of milk or kilograms you're selling, it's pounds of solids. And we know that certainly the milk, fat, and protein yields can be impacted by genetics, feeding, and management. More about that in a few minutes. But we certainly know that it's be well aware, and this is a take-home message. When we look at yields, it's both the pounds of milk and the component. You can't separate them. They're married right together as far as that goes. And also we know milk components can be used as an indication of herd health, rumen health, body condition changes that occur as well. So lots of good reasons to be watching milk components on dairy farms. So I think my theme is to build your milk check. So let's look at some of the factors that are going to play into that. This is the last numbers that just came out here a couple of weeks ago. We're always 1 month behind, so this is the most current price. Here you can see the value of milk fat, milk protein, and other solids. That would be your whey, which has values, especially in the export market. And a lot of that goes to China because of their large swine industry to make milk replacers as far as that goes. In the red letters, as for our European and our metric folks, that's the value that right now we are paying our farmers back here in. This would have been the April prices that come out in early May. So we will not get the May prices until June. I thought I'd throw this in. This is kind of the outlook on export. The reason I say that to our U.S. dairy attendees, and that we export about 16 to 18% of our dairy products, and we were hoping to achieve 20%, but of course our tariffs will be a factor in as well. So recently you'll see that this is the April 30th price, that it keeps changing every day. Some of us see those price changes. And so we have the US, the EU, the European Union, and New Zealand, which would be New Zealand, Australia, but this is New Zealand price. And so you're saying, can we export this product? And you can see if you look at cheese and butter, we are the low cost producers here, which means we should have a good opportunity to export these products compared to going to the EU and New Zealand to buy as well. If you look at powder, it's pretty neutral. They're about all within pennies of each other here at this stage of the game. Now, the other thing that's going on, some of you have heard about, and that is the US dollar is a little bit weaker right now, and that enhances our export opportunities as well. So certainly when you look at building our milk check, certainly if we cannot export this 18% dairy product, now we got a problem, and then we can't eat our way out of that as well. We look at historically, these are butter fat prices. This came off of a USDA website, and you can see it varies a great deal. Early, you can see in early 2021, that's still COVID. And so you can see the price of butterfat was quite a bit lower. You can see in 2022 some very high prices, and we're coming back to that same realization here in 2024. So certainly there's quite a bit of variation in butterfat prices. And the question might be, well, what are we doing with that milk fat here in the US? Where does that butterfat go? And this came out of the Hoard's Dairyman article here in January, and you can see that about 42% ends up in cheese, 18% in butter, and that's kind of the superstar commodity. It used to be, remember, butter was not considered a healthy anymore. Now considered a very healthy product, and we're starting to see whole milk potentially coming back in school systems. So I think we're going to see the effects of milk fat being very favorable, and you can see other milk sales at 10%. And then that's starting to stabilize as well. That's the good news as well. And you can see the other ones. So you can see we are basically eating most of our milk fat, not drinking it in terms of cheese and butter utilization here in the US. Here are your protein prices. You'll notice they also mirror the butter fat prices pretty much, not quite the same extent. There have been times in which actually the milk protein price has been higher than the milk fat price. And I would suggest to my listeners that I think in the future, milk protein will be more important, because I would argue that the world really wants animal protein. That could be beef, pork, poultry. You could put fish in that category, and of course dairy could fall in that category as well. So I think it's going to become more important. And I smile here, you can't see me smiling, but by and large, because some countries aren't even paying for milk protein, they're not even monitoring it. And I think they're going to be behind the curve, especially if they start looking at some of these hard products we just talked about a bit earlier. Let's now look at some component update, and again, this comes out of Hoard's Dairyman, and this comes off their pages, and also from Dr. Child from Penn State. The average milk fat level in 2024 was 4.23. That's huge, guys and gals. That used to be 3.738 back in 2017, 2018. So a dramatic increase in butter fat, and milk protein has also come up at 3.29. Now we're going to show you the breed stuff here in just a bit later here in the webinar. Why is that important to us, that butter fat and protein? Because cheese yield, 100 pounds, take 100 pounds of milk, 45 kilograms. Today that produces about 11.5 pounds of cheese. Back in 2010, that'd give us a little over 10 pounds. Of course, that's huge in terms of for processors and for sales. We just get more product coming from our milk here today. That would be true for butter as well. An interesting article, you want to go back and get your Hoard's Dairyman from a couple of months ago. They showed the changes in the predicted transmitting ability. And you can see that over the last 5 years, Holsteins made the most progress of any breed, and big increases here in milk fat and milk protein. So genetically, we've really seen some improvement there. And Holstein is the only breed that saw an increase in milk fat percent. The other breeds, Jerseys were 0. If you look at that chart, all the other breeds were basically minus in milk fat. And if you listen, think about this, guys and gals, that makes sense, because we know that if you select for a component, you select against milk yield. So if you select for total pounds of fat and protein, there's a opportunity that the milk fat test will not change very much. And that's exactly what the Penn State group would show to us here on today's sheet. So the question, remember, we talk about 7 pounds, and we're going to challenge you at the end of this webinar. 7 pounds, that probably should be maybe 7.5 pounds now. And you'll see why here towards the end of the webinar. There's a lot of ways to get there. You can see if you've got a Holstein herd giving 100 pounds of milk with a 4 fat and a 3 protein, which is pretty close to breed average, but nice round numbers. You can see that number, 7% of those valuable component products. Lactose is not included in this, of course. There's your 7 pounds. You can see if I go down to 90 pounds of milk, a little bit less milk, and butter, fat, and protein comes up. You can see I get that same 7 pound target there. And for our Jersey co-workers here and crossbred people, you can get that to also say at 70 pounds of milk with a fairly high butter, fat, and milk protein levels as well. So there's lots of ways to get to 7 pounds of milk, but you can see it's a combination of both the milk yield and the components that are out there in the milk that you're leaving as leaving your farm. So now let's look at each of these components, and notice I'm going to pick each of these separately. Milk yield is really important, and I think that we're going to see some questions come in here later about, what direction should I be looking at. Do not lose focus on milk yield. Certainly we know here, and here are the reasons why. Number one, we know peak milk sets the lactation curve. In fact, there are some feed additives now on the marketplace that we only feed it for the first 21 or 30 days after cows calved in, and they set that curve up 2 or 3 kilos or 5 or 6 pounds higher. And literally it stays there for the rest of the lactation curve as long as the nutrition and management factors are there as well. And there's your second bullet point. If I'm going to get a higher lactation curve, I've got to get the groceries, the nutrients to these cows, and to sustain that milk yield and those components as well. So dry matter intake becomes a huge factor after calving if we are going to set these higher curves and maintain them. Feed efficiency is a wonderful tool we have to take a look at. And my guideline is in most herds in the United States, that number should be over 1.6 pounds of 3.5 or energy corrected milk per pound of dry matter that is consumed by the cow. Write that down. That's a take-home tool. Take a look at here, especially if you got groups of cows in larger herds here in the United States and around the world. Another thing that drives milk yield will be body condition score, meaning that can be a plus. We know it in the first 2 months after calving, cows tend to lose some body weight, especially in the first 2 or 3 weeks. As far as that goes, they need that body weight mobilization as an energy source to support the energy requirements for these cows. So that's a positive body condition score. It's a negative that if cows are too heavy, that depresses dry matter intake after calving, and now that's a double loss. Less dry matter, therefore less nutrients, and therefore it's going to really affect not only animal performance, but also animal health as far as that goes. And we know that transition management is a really key factor in setting these milk yields. And we're looking at the close-up dry cow program and the fresh cow program as well. So let's say a quick word about transition, and that's, you can go back in the archives, and Hoard has several excellent presentations on transition management. Our recommendation is that if we have a close-up group, and we just gotta have that nowadays for our dairy farmers, nutrition consultants, and veterinarians, I'm gonna add some extra energy, primarily starch, reduce the fiber a little bit because that will increase dry matter intake in these cows, add some rumen protected protein because we know we got to get some extra amino acids there for colostrum synthesis. And of course, the calf is rapidly growing at this point, especially if we have twins there. And then of course, I'd be looking at rumen protected choline. We think choline now is an essential nutrient, especially in transition cows. And then some type of DCAD product or zeolite product, which will allow me to maintain optimal levels of blood calcium in the program. And again, there's some wonderful webinars talking about these products also as well. In my fresh cow program, again, because of dry matter intake lagging a bit here and high production, we see these cows producing 100 pounds of milk 7 to 10 days after calving. I've got to get the amino acids there. So I'm going to increase rumen undegraded protein here. Functional fiber works coming out of the Rick Grant's group. In fact, if you just saw the most recent article, he discusses that there. We know also that looking at beta-hydroxybutyric acid, that's a ketone body. Some new work out of Minnesota saying that you want to look at week 2. All cows are probably going to have higher levels of BHBA in week 1, but week 2 is kind of key. And that same thing applies to blood calcium. So some brand new data that keeps your eyes and ears open on that as well. It's a changing waterfront. And certainly we want to be looking at another nice tool. Those of you that have milk recording at the parlor, this would be robotic milkers. It could be automation systems there. Look at your herd and see what is the milk yield 2 weeks after calving, 4 weeks after calving, and it better be increasing. It's an excellent tool to evaluate how well your cow has transitioned into the fresh cow programs there. And then take a look at peak milk production and herd average. As Kayleen mentioned earlier, you can print out the PowerPoints, and this is a powerful one. It said, well, what should peak milk be? And this is for Holsteins. Jerseys will follow shortly. Let's look over on the far left-hand side. You'll see lactation 1, 2, and 3+. This data comes from North Carolina Dairy Processing Center, and we're going to go back again this year and see if they will repeat this. This was done in 2017, so just know what the timeline is here. So this is not showing our current dynamics. But now you can see, besides, in each of those lactation numbers, we have 4 levels of production. And 26,000 would catch pretty much the national average right now. And so you can see for heifers, the peak milk should be about 90 pounds of milk. If your herd average is there, you can see your herd average is higher or lower. You can see how that changes there. Next, come across, this is that ratio of total lactation to peak milk performance. Remember the old thumb rule was 200 pounds. Take peak milk times 200 pounds. That's how much your animal should produce. Notice that number varies. And first lactation cow, that's close to almost 300 pounds. So, you know, if a cow's peaked at, you know, and you can see it there at 90 pounds of peak milk for first lactation times 300, that'd be 27,000 pounds. It matches up very, very nicely. Notice in second lactation cows, that drops down to more like 230. And then there's your 200-pound number right there at older lactation cows. So again, remember those thumb rules have all changed now. 300 to about 230, and 200 would be the numbers we want to write down there, or get this sheet out. And then take a look. This is coming off of the processing center. We break it down by days in milk, and you may discover weaknesses in your program. The 41 to 100 days in milk, that should be your peak milk. And look, there it is. It's right there. So all cows peak. But if they peak in the first less than 40 days, you have not captured the true peak. If they are peaking out at 100 to 120 days, 140 days, 160 days, you've lost the peak. Yeah, you still have a peak, all right, but you don't have the true peak there. So what a powerful table you have here. And notice at the bottom, you can see we've got several thousand herds. This is your data coming out of the Raleigh Processing Center. And our thanks to John Clay for pulling this data together for us back in 2017 information. For you Jersey colleagues, there's that same data. I'll not walk you through it. It shows the same trends. Notice, and I found this interesting, you'll notice the thumb rules on peak milk and peak performance stay about the same, roughly about 300, 230, and a little bit more for the mature cows. But there you have it. You can look at that at your leisure, print that off, or get it, or let us know. We'll get it to you one way or another. So that takes care of milk yield. That's the first part of that three-legged stool. Now let's talk about milk fat. That's another important fat, and that's what we're getting paid for. That's where the most money today is coming, although I'm arguing in the future it will shift. So where does it come from? Well, all of you know this information. Basically, about half of it's coming from volatile fatty acids. So that's got acetate and butyrate written all over it. The word that comes from Cornell is de novo synthesis. In other words, the mammary gland actually builds this milk fat by putting together these 2 carbon, 4 carbon units together, and more about that in just a minute. So you can see it tends to be the smaller or the shorter chain fatty acids. The other half comes from blood lipids. These are fatty acids. They can come basically, or are going to be your C16, and so they overlap. So you see there is an overlap here, which makes diagnostic a little bit more challenging, but all the C18s are there. Both your saturated and unsaturated fatty acids fit there. So where do these fatty acids come from? Well, they come from dietary sources. These will come from oil seeds, such as soybeans, could come canola and seeds in Canada, a cottonseed down in Texas would be a factor as well. And of course, corn oil, corn coming from corn silage, corn grain, brewer's grains would be a good source of dietary oils as well. Body fat mobilization is another source, and those are your NEFAs, non-steroid fatty acids. And that's why some of you veterinarians will analyze, and nutritionists will analyze fresh cows for blood NEFAs and blood ketones, because it reflects if we're getting excessive body fat mobilization. And that can, we mentioned earlier, can be a negative out there in terms of dry matter intake, ketosis, and animal health performance. And then of course there's some growth production of these coming from the rumen microbes themselves, and the liver itself can mobilize some of these sources as well. Now you've seen milk fat structure. There you are. You write that down in your diary today. You've seen on the right side is glycerol. Glycerol is a carbon source, only makes up about 5 to 7% of the fat. The fatty acids, you can see all those little jigs there. Those are different carbon atoms in there. So if it was oleic acid, we'll talk about in just a second, there'll be 18 of those there as well. Michigan State is now suggesting there might be an order of how these get attached to this glycerol molecule. So again, that story is not over completely as well. And so these fatty acids, then when they come into the digestive tract, they are broken down and released to fatty acids to be utilized by the cow or produced into milk fat. And the glycerol can be used as a carbon source, but as a very small source of carbon, such as sugars and starches. This comes from Dave Barbano, simply showing where these fatty acids are. And you can see his guidelines are listed there. De novo synthesis, you can see, makes up about a third, not quite a third, around 25, 30%. In the middle of that next one, and that makes it a little bit more difficult. And then, of course, all your other long chain fatty acids over there on the right side, those are your 18 1s, 2s, and 3s listed there as well. Recently at the Reno conference, some of you were there, I know Heather Dan gave a very nice report, and this is her guidelines based on their data that they're getting at the Minor Institute and also from some co-ops that they work with and milk processing companies. Denosynthesis around about 25 to 30%. The preformed, which would be your coming from your oil seeds and body fat, 40-45%. So you can use these as diagnostic tools. And in fact, there are co-ops and DHI centers that provide this data, and up in Canada as well. They will give you this makeup. So what a powerful tool, because if for some reason denosynthesis dropped down below 25%, then you are not producing the volatile fatty acids that you expect you need to have there, and that's rumen microbes. It's got rumen microbes written all over it. So another beautiful tool you and I can utilize in evaluating milk fat, the fatty acid composition itself. Rick Grant, retired, and this is also from the Minor Institution, looking at some cow management factors that can affect the synthesis of the fatty acid by the mammary gland. So if I reduce the volatile fatty acid, acetate, and or butyrate, then I will see potentially less denosynthesis. And so you can see that they looked at, and these are data they collected out there at the Institute, I believe out in the state, and you can see that if we have a reduced feed bunk space, less than 18 inches or 46 centimeters, that simply puts pressure on less feed consumption and therefore less denosynthesis, and that reduces milk fat and test. And the second one in blue, same thing. So if I have high densities, over 1.1 cows per stall, we saw that same effect. And again, you can see that it's going to affect the VFA and dry matter intake production in the cow. No big surprise on the black number 3, if you're going to feed oil, and that's, I would argue that's where some of these really high butterfat tests you're going to see here in this webinar is coming from. We're just feeding a lot more oil to these cows, either coming from oil seeds and or from commercial products out there on farms. And then of course, we're doing a better job with defining physically effective fiber. And again, the Minor Institute has got a great way of doing this. And we're looking somewhere they're using UNDF, typically at least up to over 6% and under 10% to optimize dry matter intake. And bingo, there's that word again. If I'm going to try to get good components, I've got to get these cows to consume dry matter. And this physically effective NDF can be another useful tool that you should calculate on your rations. Every one of you dairy farmers should know that you should be around 8% UNDF in the feeding program. We need to have a minimal amount to keep rumen function and VFA production up, and not too much to restrict dry matter intake. Beautiful slide that we borrowed from Dr. Kevin Hamilton from Penn State University. And for the sake of time, our time is getting way us here. I'm not going to walk you through it, but you can see those factors that can cause what they call classic milk fat depression. You can look at that list as well. Print off this here. There's a lot of things you need to study on your own, but you understand ways to increase it. We already talked about those showing down there on the bottom left-hand panel. And then the non-nutrient factors. So these are things genetically selection, season. And we're coming here, guys and gals, heat stress. Let me tell you, you and I both know what happens to milk fat, milk protein under heat stress, depending on your heat abatement system on your farm. You'll see here in just a minute the stage of lactation and the age of the animal as well. So powerful, powerful. And we could give, in fact, maybe Hoard Dairyman want to bring Dr. Hamilton come in and give an entire webinar on this PowerPoint. Powerful, powerful message. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention high oleic acid. In fact, in a recent article that was in another dairy magazine, 23% of the soybeans in 2024 in Indiana were high oleic soybeans. For some of you who might be listening, you say, what in the world is high oleic soybeans? Well, they're coming really fast. It really came quickly from over in Penn State in New York, or Pennsylvania and New York, a lot of interest over there. High oleic fatty acids, soybeans mean that the soybean seed oil itself is different in fatty acid composition. Stay tuned. We're going to see more of this coming up in other seeds in the future, I project as well. Oleic is very rumen friendly. This is an 18-1 for those you chemists out there. 18 carbon, one double bond here, and you can see that 75% of of the fatty acids in that bean is going to be rumen friendly. 7% is oleic, linoleic, excuse me. And that is one of your PUFAs, the polyunsaturated ones, and you see why that's a problem. Now look, see the conventional soybean? It just flips. It's almost 54% PUFAs and only 23% oleic. So we have now selected, and there's 3 companies that have it. You'll see them there as well. Michigan State has done some of the real classic work with this. They have had a very high level. I would not recommend this high level. We are suggesting somewhere around 5 to 10% in the feeding program of the soybeans, period. But you can go higher with oleic at this point. Look at that. The research clearly points out there is no reduction in yield. So they yield very well, and the seed cost is quite similar. You'll see that there are 2 GMOs coming from a Pioneer and Bayer. However, there's also Beck. Beck is the 3rd one. It's not listed there, but that's non-GMO, developed at the University of Missouri. So again, for your organic people, there is another alternative for you to get fat into the feeding program. We'd recommend to feed them as roasted soybeans, because you'll get a higher level of amino acids to the dairy cow to build milk protein, and of course lysine comes with soybean based proteins as well. You can feed them raw. More about that maybe in the Q&A period. And of course, one of the real deal here is that it means if you raise them on your farms or purchase them from a neighbor, you can reduce your purchase feed cost as well. This is a very busy slide. Again, hopefully you will print that off. I highlighted in yellow is those same numbers we just saw. So if you go over, you can see the top yellow line there. You can see 18.2, 18.2, 18.3. Those are your PUFAs, your polyunsaturated fatty acids, and you'll see why in just a minute why that's a problem for you. Now you look at the Flemish. That of course is the Pioneer or the Cortova sources, and now you can see those same numbers as well. But notice, just look at down that 18.2 column very quickly. Just look at that, and you can see a corn silage. You'll see cottonseed. You'll see you know, a lot of big numbers there. And you and I feed those products, so that's why this oleic, high oleic soybean is becoming a big one, because we can take that calculation more or less more to our advantage. So what's the problem with 18.2 then? Remember, that's kind of the magic PUFA number here. Major PUFAs on most dairy rations. By the way, that's an essential fatty acid. Now, it's essential because it has a role in reproduction, cell membrane function, and immunity. And so some of you are feeding rumen-protected PUFAs because you want to make sure you get that benefit for your animals without having a negative effect in the rumen. So we already told you that these feeds can be very high in content and available in the rumen, being freed up in the rumen, and you'll see them listed there. Notice my guideline is 500 grams of PUFAs. You can see a high corn sides based diet with corn grain can really exceed 400 grams. So you're almost there before you put any soybeans or cottonseed into the diets of your dairy animals at this point. And so certainly, depending if we are breaking those seeds up, processing them, grinding them, which we will do in all cases, except for fuzzy cottonseed, that oil now becomes available in the rumen and can really cause problems. And of course, distillers grains is really changing. Back in the day, 5 or 6 years ago, we'd see distillers grains running for 14, 13, 12% oil. Now these companies discovered you can take that oil and make biodiesel out of it. So they're extracting that, and so you want to be sure you know what level of oil, they don't take it all, what level of oil do you have in your distiller's grain to complement your corn silage levels, and if you're feeding any oil seeds in the feeding program. So you say, well, what's the problem here, Mike? Well, here's the problem. First of all, we're going to increase the C18 PUFAs. This is primarily C18.2 and a little bit of C18.3. And the good news is the green arrow. Ideally, that if your rumen conditions are optimal and working properly, and you see that on your list a bit earlier, then you'll come down and that'll be converted over to stearic acid. And of course, that's a saturated fatty acid and very friendly. Now here comes the bad news. It's the blue arrow. The blue arrow says, well, now the rumen also can convert this over to what we call a trans 10 cis 12, and that's a configuration of the fatty acid, just how it twists it around. And of course, And then it goes down to trans 10. And a lot of the researchers suggest that that's the bad guy. That's the one that's wearing the black hat, as we say, and that's the one that can drop your butterfat test out based on Cornell research, a half a point. In other words, from 3.8 to 3.2 can happen there, and it only takes 5 to 7 grams. It doesn't take very much of this. Again, eventually it should or could end up in stearic acid, but the problem is it doesn't get down there to that level as well. So now you understand why we want to really monitor this PUFA level and why the oleic soybeans are really gaining a lot of traction out there in the Midwest and the Northeast as far as that goes. And of course, then that then inhibits the mammary gland from producing milk fat. Well, another common question in our dairy meetings? Well, where's all this milk fat coming from? I'm getting paid for it. I'm not complaining, but where's it coming from? Genetics is a big factor. And you saw that there a bit earlier with from the child data from the PTAs. So you can select, but remember, do not select for percent. Select for pounds of milk fat and pounds of milk protein. And don't forget the protein, because I think that I would have that in my selection criteria. We also are seeing some shifting to more jerseys and milking herds. Some of that has to do with the component pricing system. Feed efficiency gets to be a factor. Heat stress gets to be a factor. And of course, crossbreeding is still out there and being done on a number of dairy farms here in the U.S. There's the big one, high quality forage. If you have high quality forage, you win 2 ways. First of all, it increases acetate production in the rumen, and the Penn State group, Dr. Haveltine, has done some neat research on that as well, and it also increases dry matter intake. So we call that a win-win. And that, of course, anything we can do to improve rumen efficiency will be a plus, because that means we get more VFAs and more precursors for our animals and more energy available. And then, of course, we are feeding more fat. Certainly, we're looking at our oil seeds coming into play, the Ohio Lake soybeans, some of the commercial, some of the palm fatty acids, very popular, but they really drive butter fat. And of course, not all of them are created equal. So be sure you check with your nutritionist of these various commercial products, which one you should be feeding and what is your goal out there on your dairy farm. Now, we also can look at that a little differently. This is my new research study. Some of you can buy in on this. Where this is called this is the Hutjens crossbred cow. You'll see that the front half is Holstein, so she eats like a Holstein, and the back half is a Jersey, so she produces like a Jersey in terms of components. Now, some of you are interested, just reach out to me, to my website, or to my email, and I'll let you buy in on this. There's still opportunity to buy into this new technology that I am developing here at the University of Illinois. Well, that ends up the second part of our leg of our tool. The third one is milk protein. And I think the key here is write this down. Cows need amino acids, just like you and hogs and chickens need amino acids, so do your dairy cow. We feed milk protein in an attempt to meet amino acid requirements. And so we might ask, where do these amino acids come from? Much like the butterfat, you can see that about 2/3 of it's going to come from the rumen, fermentable carbohydrates that drive bacterial protein. And by the way, bacterial protein has the ideal amino acid profile for both tissue, meaning meat for body growth, and also for milk production. So it's an ideal protein, and that's why some of you are taking whey proteins when you're trying to lose weight, because you want to make sure you have enough amino acids in your diet in the feeding program. And there you can see our numbers. I will not read those to you, but we would say if you can add the starch and sugar together, that should total around 32. You add then the soluble fibers, some of the pectins, and some of those very rumen fermentable carbohydrates, that should come over 40. So again, think about this. Remember, you feed for fermentable carbohydrates to drive microbial protein yield, which is going to be your amino acids. There's no amino acids in the carbohydrate, but they grow in the rumen, the amino acid. And then, of course, your protein requirements, and you can see a level of protein, the types level, and of course, look at that one over there, 10 to 12% rumen degraded protein, and that's the new comes right on nasal. So you want to make sure that also feeds right into that first point. That really accentuates the production of microbial protein. And some of you may be feeding isoacids. That becomes a big player in the isoacid discussions as well. And then you can see, I say about half of that should be soluble. And of course, that's got urea or slow release urea products written all over it here. And then of course, different ones. We know that, for example, soybean products are very high in lysine, where some of the corn products are much higher in methionine. This is some older data from Dr. Chuck Schwab that he published in the NRC, and you can see these are the levels that you're looking for. So we have those levels there. This is the percent of essential amino acids. In this study, you can see right around 7.2%. It levels off. Feeding any more of that, those amino acids no longer are being used as essential amino acids, but are going to be deaminated and used for other purposes in the program. And here comes methionine, about 2.4%. So that's where those numbers are coming from. So let me say, well, where did those numbers coming from my nutritionist talking about? He's looking at these kind of charts that were published in the 2001 NRC and give you a pretty good number as well. More about that in just a second. Here's one of the classic studies from The Ohio State. And you'll see that what they did here is to look at what they call two different studies. This one's called LP, which stands for low protein. And you can see on the left side is the control study. The one on the right is balanced for amino acids. And lo and behold, you'll see we got about a 8-pound more milk response here, a 1/10 of a point increase in milk protein, and a drop in milk urea nitrogen. And income over feed cost doesn't show on this table here, but even though we've bought some of these amino acids, it ended up making about 84 to 90 cents more profit per cow because of getting the extra production and milk yield. Which leads very nicely into Dr. Jimmy Clark's PowerPoint here, and says if you're going to feed rumen protected amino acids, one of three things could happen. One, we can see an increase in milk protein, and typically 1/10 to 2/10 is pretty common, especially if you're below the breed average, that you'll see here in just a minute, and occurs very, very quickly because I'm getting the amino acids into these cows very quickly. You may also see an increase in milk yield, as we saw in the Ohio State data, a milk yield increase and an increase in the milk protein components. There was no butterfat response. We weren't expecting one here. And then you may see a butterfat test, especially if you're using rumen protected methionine. And that could see a fat test, and that's coming through another role of that amino acid. Other than just amino acid, it also has some other functions in the diet of that dairy cow as well. So those are the three responses you might have. Got from Hoard's Dairyman their latest market survey results, and you can see that there are a number of different sources of rumen protected methionine here. You can see in this study about 15% of the herds reported that they were feeding rumen protected amino acids, typically in that 2-cent range. And the number we tend to see is somewhere around 8 to 10 to 12 grams. So yes, there's going to be another 20 or 30 cents involvement here. You'll see the different brands here listed, and you want to ask three things. Number one, what is the percent methionine in their product? Number two, what percent is rumen protected, so it does escape, but doesn't get degraded in the rumen? And number three, then what percent becomes available in the small intestine to be absorbed? And so the magic number is the metabolizable, in this case, methionine available, and these will vary depending on product, and there's some vary there. Be sure you ask those kinds of questions. Here in that same Hoard's Dairyman market survey is lysine, and you can see the price is about the same. There are fewer suppliers. Again, you can see who are the major suppliers here. Again, about 15% reported they were balancing here. That number will be higher, usually typically in that 20 or 30 gram level. So now you're going to be spending a little more money, but the economics are there at this one as well. And the same three things apply in terms of selection of the product. So let's wrap this up then and just get ready to wrap up our webinar here, and perhaps the most important part, and that is number one, you must have a rumen modeling program, because it will calculate amino acid flow, dry matter intakes, the effects of calculate levels of poof. It does a lot of neat things, and you'll need to find that sweet spot, because basically I'm not sure there is one magic number for every herd here in the United States. One number is useful is looking at the ratio of lysine to methionine. This comes out of NASEM, 2.65 to 1, and that goes back to those charts you saw just a little bit earlier. According to the Hoard's Dairyman, 40% of the herds that were in that survey, and these are producers that read Hoard's Dairyman that are selected each year, they are 40% were balancing for amino acids, but only 15% were buying rumen protected amino acids. I found that interesting as well. And then there got to be a cut point. And when you get cows that are producing in excess of 1 kilogram of true protein, or 2.4 pounds, a little bit more than 1 kilo of that, then I think you need to be sure you have a rumen model and be sure you're balancing the amino acid profile here, and or if your cows are low on milk protein, and you'll see that here in just a minute. So let's now go to we've talked about the three-legged stool: milk yield, milk fat, milk protein. Now we'll say, what do you as farmers, what kind of tools do you as a farmer, you as a consultant, as a veterinarian, nutritionist have to work with? Again, each year, Hoard's Dairyman comes out with the breed averages. This is DHIR data, comes from the breed associations. And so you can pick your breed here, and you can see what is normal, typical, using that database as well. Remember, I said the US average is 4.3, and you can see obviously the other breeds contribute to make that number higher than Holsteins at 4.11. The Holsteins have really come up. Jerseys in the last year or two have also increased their butterfat content as well. The other breeds stay pretty static at this stage of the game. Notice the milk protein there are listed as well. And so the question is, if your milk protein is below 3.2, you probably are shorting your good cows on amino acids. That's how I would relate to that. Another number you can look at, if you divide the butter fat into the milk protein. This is based on components now. That ratio is about 77%. If we went back to 2017, that's when, for example, if we had a butter fat of 3.8 and a 3.2 protein, then that ratio would have been 84%. So that ratio is changing. So we are relatively getting more fat than protein in our milk. You can also do the reciprocal. Wisconsin researchers tend to use that one. They divide the protein into the milk fat, and that comes out the value of about 130%. This is a powerful chart. That's why you want to make sure you may have to ask the question, are my cows in my breed getting the job done? So if that number goes over 0.9, that's how I use it. Remember, we said it should be around, we go back so you see where that number came from. That number was 77%. If that number comes over 90%, you're missing butterfat. And these are the reasons you look at that. And if you had that number below 0.75, you're missing milk protein, and now you're short amino acids. And those are the things to take a look at here as well. Now, this is a very important chart. This should look familiar to you. You've seen it before, but now this is milk fat, milk protein for Holsteins. And so again, we've got that same lactation number breakdown, the same levels of milk production, same days in milk. Every time you see a red number, those cows were below the breed average back in 2016. And so you see in milk fat, you can see once these cows get going here in early lactation, they just run out of energy. And that's why you guys and gals are adding fat and oils to these diets. You're trying to help these cows out, or why you're trying to add sugar in some cases to boost these numbers on up. Now look over on the right side. And by the way, if you see this chart, you can see for our European colleagues, there's your metrics. So if you want to look at milk yield on metrics, on the left side is the US, and the right side is the metric system. Now look at milk protein. And this would be any cows are below 3%. And you can see in the first 100 days, regardless of milk yield or age of cows, they're all red. I call that a huge opportunity. So now the question is, what does your herd look like? And do you have some missing links to take a look at? And here's the jerseys showing some similar patterns, not quite as extreme as the Holstein, but again, the same kind of data you can look at your leisure. Another thing you can do, especially for smaller herds on DHI that have paper copies, I would still have paper copies. I have two things I'd look for. I call milk fat inversions. And that are any cows that are 0.2 of a point higher in milk protein and milk fat. Now, if you look at our chart, that's a big shift. And then there's an example. So I would circle every one of those cows on my herd if you've got data that are what I call milk fat inversions. I'm calling milk fat depression, and some of you may call the first one milk fat depression. I'm calling milk fat depression in any cow that is 1 full percentage point below the herd average. So if your herd average is 4%, how many cows you got below 3%? And those are dangerous situations because something bad is going on out there, probably in the rumen of these dairy cattle, which could have some long-reaching effects as well. Okay, here's something else to think about. Today's talk is milk component efficiency. And I just came across an article on this, and I thought it was really cool. I can look and ask the question. You should be getting somewhere around 11 to 12% of your dry matter intake as milk solids, milk fat, milk protein. So in other words, if I've got a cow that is consuming 55 pounds of dry matter and she's producing 7 pounds of those milk fat and milk protein, that's a really good milk component efficiency. Now the previous feed efficiency was 1.6. That's more of an energy and a dry matter number. This one is milk component driven. And so you can see if I get that same 7 pounds of milk solids with only 6 pounds of dry matter, now my efficiency goes down to 11.7%. If I had that same 55 pounds of dry matter, but only get 6 pounds of milk solids, now my efficiency is down to 11%. And now you can see the last one very easily, 60 pounds of dry matter, 10% conversion at 6 pounds of solid. That's another fun one to look at. And I think you're going to see more of that coming across in diagnosing farms, especially since we're really keenly aware. Most of us now know what that number is on milk solids. Now, here's another new one. I'm going to call it milk protein efficiency. And so here's my base cow. I got 90 pounds of milk with a 3.2 true milk protein. I use true milk protein because not everybody in the world measures milk protein on true protein versus total protein. This is true protein. I got 2.88 pounds of milk protein being produced each year. I mean, each day by these cows in this herd. You can see if she's eating 55 pounds of dry matter, it's 17% protein. I'm capturing 30% of this as milk protein. Remember, I'm not capturing any weight changes here or growth in cattle. That would be done in a research herd. Farmers, you don't have that kind of data available to fine tune this number, but if you did, more power to you. Here I can see if I get that same 55 pounds of dry matter, but it's only 16% crude protein, my feed efficiency went up because I'm getting the same amount of protein being produced by my cow, and she's producing it with a little bit less total crude protein in the diet. That's a good number, by the way, 33%. That'd be above average right now in the United States. And you can see what happens. We get down here, and the Cornell people suggest that, and eventually in the future, you and I, your nutritionists, are going to get this number close to 40%. So that's another efficiency product here, looking at one component, in this case, milk protein as well. So what's our take-home message as we wrap up here? And get your questions in, and we'll have a few time for that. I will argue milk components and milk protein yield is going to be important. You cannot sacrifice one to achieve the other. Milk protein, to me, is going to be really important. I'll look at your records to see if there are opportunities. The charts I had here, see if there's opportunities in the first lactation group, or 40 to 100 days of milk, for example. And then you got these tools we showed with you as well. Breed averages, the ratios of milk protein to milk fat, feed efficiency, milk protein efficiency, component efficiency, and milk urea nitrogen can be a useful number as well. And so some of you may be frustrated and say, well, is that really possible? Hold on to your hats. This is a Midwest Holstein herd. 421 cows, and this was released just recently by Holstein USA, one of the top herds in the United States. They are averaging 110 pounds of milk. That ends up being 132 pounds of energy corrected milk. That 421 cows producing that level of milk, 4.8 milk fat, 3.3 protein. They're averaging 173 days in milk, so it's a fairly optimal days in milk. And look at that, 8.9 pounds of milk fat and protein. Just amazing numbers to look at. And we're going to be seeing more of those at our four-state extension conference here, because they're going to recognize some of the best herds here in the four-state area. So with that, we are going to go ahead and open up our question area. So I'm going to escape here and hopefully get back to the website here. Oh, I can't do that. I should have not done that. Okay, just hold on a minute here, and we're going to turn this back over, and I shouldn't have closed it because I've got to stay active here, so stay with me here. Be ready here, Kylie, and once we
no worries.
Okay, we'll get you back.
While you're doing that, we'll just chime in that thank you, first of all and foremost, for that presentation. And as Mike's pulling the slides up here, I just want to to view this webinar, remind everyone, or any of our previous webinars, you can visit our archive at any time at www.hoards.com/webinars. And we hope you make plans to attend our next webinar, which will take place on Monday, June 9th. That will be at noon Central Time, just like our other webinars, where we'll have Dr. Barb Peterson from Sunrise Veterinary Service in Texas, and she'll speak to us about managing the maternity pen, both the cow and calf care. Then in July, we'll have another familiar face to the Hoard's team with Corey Geiger with CoBank, who will be chatting about dairy industry trends. And now, Mike, we've had some questions come in, and very active questions. And I'll give you the first one here. So we always calculate lysine to methionine ratio of 2.7 to 1 for better milk production. But shouldn't we calculate also more of both amino acids for their role in the cow's body?
Yeah, you're exactly right. That person should get an A+. That's a great question. That's the ratio. But, you know, I would argue you want to take a look at the total amounts in that diet, because we need some of those amino acids to replace worn out tissue. At its point, if it's an animal, it would be a young animal, there'll be some growth that occur. The model will pick up on that, by the way. If you've got heifers that are growing in the first and second lactation, it'll include that as well. And so to me, the ratio is pretty secondary. I look at the actual amounts. So in other words, if I need 75 grams of metabolizable methionine and 200 grams of metabolizable lysine, that's the number I want. The ratio, the reason we look at ratio is because it appears if the ratio is not optimal and gets out of line, then we don't get quite as good a response as far as that goes as well. And of course, all these models now look at all these other amino acids, and now we're seeing some interest in the other amino acids as well. Histidine, for example, is being looked at Penn State. And if you start looking at the isoacids that are coming, most of those isoacids are coming from amino acids that are degraded in the rumen. So I think you're going to look at all of them. So great question. And I think you want to look at the total levels of each of these amino acids, not just the ratio.
Well, this question's in the same vein. How much metabolizable methionine and lysine is required to produce 1 kilogram of milk?
Boy, that's great. And I don't have my book in front of me here. I could go ahead and look it up. NASM have, there's a table in the back of the book that have the sample rations, guidelines. They have the amino acids there as well. And so my apologies. I don't have the book in front of me. I can't give you that number, but it's there. I know it's there because I saw it, but I just don't have it memorized.
No problem. All right, the next question that has come in, what is the best fresh cow feeding strategy to avoid the inflammatory response caused by C18-2?
Wow, it's a good question. Perhaps there's Dr. Bradford at Michigan State would be a better person to answer that question at this point. I think you want to stay below whatever that threshold number you have. I use 500 grams of the PUFAs in the feeding program. Now, in fresh cows, it gets a bit challenging because dry matter intake is also going to be reduced, and that's going to reduce that number down a little bit as well. So you should be thinking about this. So all I would say is that I think you still want to feed the fat in there. Adam Block did a wonderful study looking at the roles of the fatty acids, and he was adding 1.5% of these commercial fat product, and that's a nice number, 1.5% fat. So there's my answer. I'm going to blame it on Adam Block. I would say you could add to try to minimize any risk 1.5% of the ration dry matter, which therefore takes into account the reduced dry matter in the first 4 to 6 weeks after calving until these cows come on full force on dry matter intake. And then he was looking at the ratios of the oleic acid in these programs here, and he was getting at least 10 to 20% oleic, which is a rumen-friendly fatty acid. So I'd be cautious those 2 points, the level, and then also making sure you had some oleic acid in there, which increases fat digestibility, which is going to be a real plus as well. And we're well aware, just beware what I said earlier, that is an essential fatty acid. So if you're going to talk about rumen-protected C18, C18-2, C18-3, that's a different story than if you're going to feed it as an oil seed or from corn or corn grain. So I would just be aware of both of those factors.
Great. I think this is a clarifying question that came in. Do you mean a high corn silage-based diet can reduce milk fat?
By itself, I don't think so. But if you're going to come in and put some distillers grains in there, depending on the oil level, and you're going to give me some fuzzy cottonseed, and you're going to bring in or some other oil seed, look out. Just look out, because remember, you're going to be getting up to, I think corn grain and corn silage by itself probably is not going to be a problem. But be very careful on what your other supplemental sources are coming into play. And we're talking high corn silage diets. We're talking maybe 75, 80% of the dry matter from forage is coming from corn silage. That's a high corn silage based diet. And yet, if you really want to get milk yield, you will get milk production because of the starch levels and the availability of that starch in the rumen in the feeding program.
Great. Another question that came in, why was fat so easy to make this year? Was it growing days? Was it the change in breeding strategy with the terminal cross to Angus on the lower end of the herd? And this person recognized this might be a regional question.
Yeah, well, I think we take back the last two ones as far as that goes. You're right. I think the regional is right, because my answer is going to be, I'm going to go with forage quality. I think forage quality is really made a difference. And if you look at some of the work that John Geiser reported in one of his webinars this last year, there was differences versus California, for example, versus the New England area or the northeastern part of the country as far as that goes, because of in some cases drought and the height of the plant, and also the growing degree days enter into play. I would take the genetics out. I don't think genetics have anything to do with it. I think it's a short-term response with my biased answer, and I think it's got forages written all over it. Also, I think the excitement of high oleic soybeans is really catching on in the last year and a half as far as that goes. We have farmers now that are buying them from neighbors as far as that goes, paying a premium of $1 to $1.25 over market price for the high oleic beans, because there's no yield reduction. In fact, they out yield some of the other traditional soybeans on the marketplace as well. So I think it's a combination of renewed interest. When you get milk fat approaching $3 a pound, farmers are saying, that's kind of interesting. And they can pencil push that. Even with some of the commercial products out there, they can still make some money out there by feeding those more expensive sources there. But to me, it's got forage quality and dry matter intake written all over it. That's a great question. That's my answer. You could ask maybe 4 other people and you might get 4 different answers.
Great. You touched on this a bit, but how do we feed for 7 pounds of butterfat on an organic dairy?
Yeah, that's the really good news. To me, you now can buy the non-GMO high oleic soybeans, so that's going to be a real plus at the program. I'm not close enough to the commercial products to see how they rank, but again, you'd have to ask your inspector or whoever does that to see if some of those products are commercially available. The other good news is that there's no cap on forage quality. So if you're organic farm or a conventional farm, you can still raise high quality forages. And to me, that's going to be your answer. So to me, it's going to be high quality forages to get as many of my nutrients as I can from there. I know the corn is much more expensive, organic corn versus conventional corn. And of course, the high oleic soybeans give me a nice revenue opportunity there as well to go with, because almost all the soybeans that are not the high are almost all GMO. There are some non-GMO hybrids out there, but that really restricts the organic people. So I think it's forage quality and high oleic soybeans. Be careful, get sure you get the right variety. That'll be the Beck variety versus the Pioneer versus the Bayer ones, and that would be one way to get to 7 pounds, in my view. Good question, a very fair question though. Better answers now than we had maybe 2 years ago.
Great. Another question that came in, what are the biggest management and environmental factors that can limit the nutritional efforts to maximize component production?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll just cheat a little bit and say I think Rick Grant's group really went on and said we're going to be looking at such things as the overcrowding and bunk space design. He's got beautiful data to illustrate that as well. Certainly, anything in management that we can increase dry matter intake, and that could include extra feeding at night, for example, or bunk stability of the feed stuff, or adjusting the UNDF levels in the diet so that we can optimize dry matter intake. Adding sugar to me would be another nutrient factor that can help drive components, because it does two things. It increases the rate of carbohydrate in the rumen very early when that diet goes in there, and second of all, increases palatability and ideally reduces sorting. So those are all winners as far as that goes. So certainly feed bunk management gets to be a big factor as well, along with the other things we just pointed out. Very good question as far as that goes. To me, I'm a big fan of dry matter intake. Dry matter intake does so many things as far as amino acid supply and energy availability to build milk fat components. It's a real winner.
Great. Another question, what are the most important monthly metrics that a farm can track or monitor as they strive to improve component production?
Well, the magic word that piqued my interest was monthly. To me, I'd look at months. If I look at milk, I look at months, and if months start really shifting on me, it has to go by, probably at least, according to the Iowa State researchers, at least 2 units. In other words, so if my month was always sitting at 8, and all of a sudden it went down to 6, or it went up to 13, for example, then I'm saying, what happened? What really happened there on milk urea nitrogen as far as that goes? Second of all, on a monthly basis, if you can look at pen averages, to me, that's another powerful tool. And I know one of our big herds here in Illinois, he generates feed efficiency by pen. He gets that because he feeds to an empty bunk. That's another story for another day. And he also has a milk flow meter, so he knows exactly how much milk is coming from those 400 cows. And he does a feed efficiency every day. And so he gets that every day. And he told me that he did not use it on a daily basis, but does he does a weekly average, because he says, the cow movement, shifting cows, heat stress, a lot of things can come into play on that one, timing of feeding, stuff like that. So he would be using weekly feed efficiency numbers, and he said he watches that just to see how stable that group is going to be out there as well. So I think, and then of course, you get your DHI reports comes once a month, and of course you can look at that and see what those numbers will look like on herds. And you almost have to look at individual cows. Again, for a group of 100 first lactation cows hide things. You and I just don't see them. The bulk tank or a large group of cows, there can be a couple of what we call wig links in there, and they're pretty well hidden as far as that goes. So that's a good question. That'd be that'd be the tools I'd be looking at.
Great. Another question, how do forage quality, management for successful fermentation, and general feed storage and management factors impact component production? And what are the most helpful indicators?
Wow, you almost have to repeat that question. That's a big question there. So certainly, certainly we already talked about the forage quality part of it as far as that goes. We know under storage, getting an optimal fermentation profile. For example, corn silage, I'd like to see 6% lactic acid and maybe 2% acetic acid in the fermentation profile, depending if you got Buchneri and inoculant in there as well, because we know that when these numbers start jumping around, we've had herds that had equal levels of lactic acid and acetic acid and report poor dry matter intake as far as that goes. So certainly trying to get a favorable fermentation profile would be a real plus for me. And that's got a silage inoculant written all over it in terms of dictating how I want that feed to ferment. We want to make sure that it ferments quickly. And of course, that means because I'm going to reduce dry matter losses there and the loss of nutrients. So that's going to be a plus as well. And then try to minimize, and I know John Gieser has been really pushing this one for us, and it's a good point, the hygiene of the feed. In other words, are you picking up much soil or any contamination on the plant itself that then ends up going into the silage, and then we can have these what I call fermentation problems. And especially in baggers. I've seen it in bag silage, where all of a sudden you've got a nice bag of silage, and all of a sudden you start seeing these round mold structures in it, be anywhere from the size of a golf ball to the size of a volleyball. And certainly anytime you have those types of mold developments and toxin formations, that's another risk that would have an effect on milk components and dry matter intake and yield as well. So it's a big question. Hopefully we've touched on most of the variables I would think if I look at that question maybe over time, I might even come with even some more ideas as well.
Great. We've had a lot of questions come in, but we'll try to move through them. Next one was, I'm a producer with more than adequate forage inventory and interested in growing more of my own starch and protein. What would you recommend?
Well, the protein for us, and now would be careful. I grew up in Wisconsin, worked in Minnesota, and live in Illinois, so this is pretty much Midwest. But this is the protein has got soybeans written all over it, and to me, if I had a farm, I'd be raising the oleic soybeans because it gives me all kinds of flexibility. Primarily because you're pretty much restricted to about 4 pounds of conventional soybeans because of the high PUFA numbers you're going to bring into the diet, depending on how much corn silage and corn grain you're feeding out there on the farm. And so with the high oleic soybeans, I can go up as 5 or 6 pounds or whatever it takes to get the target number I'm shooting for here. I don't have to roast them all. In other words, if I'm a little low on rumen degraded protein, then I'll feed the high oleic soybeans maybe 1 or 2 pounds raw and 3 or 4 pounds roasted. Because the oil is still there. The question simply is, I'm going to change the protein dynamics in the feeding program. As far as the starch goes, you're right. For in Illinois, Iowa, and Indiana, southern Wisconsin, and Minnesota, the word corn comes out awfully fast. I don't believe barley will compete. Some areas in northern Minnesota and up in Canada, barley will be more common because of growing degree days. So that gets to be another factor on the starch side of the equation. Wheat, by and large, doesn't compete because it's too expensive. The good news is that a number of our farmers here in Illinois will go double crop. They will go in with wheat, take that off as grain, and then take the straw, which is very valuable, and then come back in with a second crop of soybeans. And you could come in with the oleic soybeans there. May not get quite the same yield as if it was if you planted them back here in April, or in May, but certainly another approach as well. But again, you go to Europe, I know they do feed wheat in Europe, because they don't raise near the amount of corn that we do here in the U.S. So my starch level would be corn. So that's my answer. And again, I guess if you're in a different part of the region of the United States, that might change a little bit in terms of growing degree days and soil quality. But both corn and soybeans, there's a reason why these I states have those big crops.
Great. All right, lots more questions. And just for those who are still attending, if we don't get your question, we're going to be sure to email. We have all the questions collected, and we'll be sure to email you the answers and get an answer from Mike. So
yeah, I'd be happy to do that, whatever.
That would be great. Let's see here. You kind of touched on some of these. Let's say, assuming the cows always have feed access, does the timing of the delivery of the feed have an effect on production or components? For example, if I feed one time per day.
Oh, that's a neat question. And again, Rick Grant would be a better person probably to answer that question. But my answer is, I would, if possible, I would always like to have fresh feed dropped in front of my cows coming back from the milking parlor. We saw this in Saudi Arabia. That was a 7,000 cow dairy herd. And basically they would be obviously feeding 24/7, and they would have a person that would read the bunk. And that person then would say, okay, we're short, drop in 2% more feed, or vice versa, reduce it. But they would always push out the residual feed and then drop fresh feed in front of those cows. Michigan State's got the data that says you're gonna get about 15% of the dry matter per cows consumed after each meal. So if I'm dropping in fresh feed, you can see I can probably get more than half the dry matter there. Overcomes any risk of a bunk stability. You know, if we're mixing that feed up in our products on the marketplace, we could add that you could mix the feed up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And if you're only going to feed it once, and that's the mixing, that's it for the day. You could keep one load if the mixer is available to be used that way. You could keep that and then run that out, for example, after the evening milking or the last milking there, and if it was stabilized, so you wouldn't have to remix the whole ration. Because I know it takes time. It takes time, and so there's a time element as well. Second of all, you've got the ability to push up. And of course, again, if the feed is stable, now we're coming to 2 or 3 months that feed bunks may not be stable because of heat stress or heating of the feed itself, but you could have a push up. And Rick Grant's suggestion was that we'd be pushing feed up about every 2 or 3 hours to keep that feed in front of these cows as far as that goes. And of course, that's fresh feed that's being pushed up for these cows as well. So my answer is yes. If I could manage that, I would have fresh feed dropping in twice a day or 3 times a day, if I'm a 3-time-a-day milker at this point, and then timely push-ups. I'm not sure I need to push up every hour on the hour, but at least every 2 or 3 hours, especially before in the morning, before the fresh feed's going to be coming out. After they come to the parlor, you may want to push up that feed that cows couldn't reach an hour or 2 before they go in the milking parlor, let them consume that and get that consumed, reducing the way back or feed losses.
Fantastic. This was really, really good. I think we're going to wrap it up there, given where we're at on time. And thank you for your answers, Mike. I'd like to thank Dr. Hutjens from the University of Illinois for this great information that you shared on feeding. And to our listeners, thank you. We appreciate the time you spent with us today, and hope to see you in the audience of a future webinar or tune in to our Hoard's Dairyman podcast. Until next time, goodbye from our team here at Hoard's Dairyman. Thank you.
Thank you.